introduce Dr. Bailey, and then we work with her in the interim. So you can work with her in the background.
Okay. Uh, Dr. Randall Bailey is a native of Malden, Massachusetts, is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor of the Hebrew Bible at the Interdenominational Theologian Center at Atlanta, Georgia. Prior to his work at ITC, Dr. Bailey taught the Atlanta University School of Social Work and served as assistant minister at the First Congregational Church, UCC, in Atlanta. He is an ordained Baptist minister and has served on the faculty of the Institute of Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University in New Orleans. Dr. Bailey has been a visiting scholar at many notable seminaries around the world and is also the author, editor, co-editor of several books and articles focusing on ideological criticism regarding the intersections of race, gender, class, sex, sexuality, nationality, and power in the biblical text. And I introduce you, Dr. Bailey.
Okay, thank you. This seems to be, my presentation is really a connection to the question yesterday about why are evangelicals doing what they're doing, and also some connection with what has been said in the other panels today. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Warren and the committee for inviting me to be a participant in this historic conference at such a momentous and vulnerable time in our nation's history. The Spirit has a way of tricking us and throwing us into situations which are beyond our control, but to which we must respond and to excel. Though I am an ordained Black Baptist minister, as a Hebrew Bible scholar, I am an ideological critic. As was said, I approach the text by exploring how race, class, gender, ethnicity, nationality, sexuality, and power intersect in the biblical text. By this way, I get to explore what are the values and norms which are being employed in the construction of the text. This is important since we are often directed to the biblical text as being a lamp unto our feet and a guide to our lives. I have come to understand that such a concept of the text could lead us to accept our oppression as God ordained. Thus, in my view, the claim "it's in the word" is a problematic construct used to control people one wants to oppress. I think of the time that when our daughter was in the MBA program at CAU, one of her fellow students came to see me one night because he did not believe that a Black Baptist minister's daughter did not believe that wives should be submissive to their husband. I brought him into the den, sat him down, I gave him the Bible and had him read what Jesus said: if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Because it's better to lose your eye, your hand, and your foot and gain the kingdom than to keep them and lose it. And he read it. He said, never saw this before. And he read it again. I said, you understand it? He said, yeah. I said, okay. Have your hands had you doing stuff that you know you weren't supposed to be doing? He said, yes. I said, you've been looking at stuff you know you weren't supposed to be looking at? He said, kinda. I said, have your feet brought you to places that you know you weren't supposed to be, and you ended up doing stuff you knew you shouldn't do? He said, yeah. I said, well, go for it. He said, well, and I had a meat cleaver and a cutting board on the coffee table in front of him. He said, well, I said, Jesus says, cut them off. He said, oh, that really doesn't mean it. I said, well, I'm glad you said that because you said that you read the text the same way that my daughter does. When it's gonna hurt you, you say it doesn't mean what it says. But when it's gonna hurt somebody else, you want to impose it. Let me be quick to say that I am not saying we should throw away the text. In fact, at an ETWAT, Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians dialogue between South African and US theologians, Dr. Itumeleng Masala and I presented both on the book of Joshua. It was interesting since neither one of us had discussed with the other what paper we would read. Once we completed, the South Africans began attacking him and the US folk began attacking me. After a half hour of this mess, I turned to him and said, Itumeleng, they're saying we told them to throw away the Bible. I didn't tell them to do that, did you? He responded, no, Randy, I didn't tell them to do that. To which I responded, I think what they're really saying is, if our way of reading the text holds up, they would throw away the Bible. All we said was look at what is being sanctioned here. Therefore, I shall be concentrating on the subtitle of this session, Truth and Faith. Yesterday, Dr. Earl concentrated on vulnerability, but I want to look at the intersection of truth and faith. Now, I've done enough Bible studies and sermons in Black churches where people have attacked me verbally for my presentations. Let me just give two examples to see the problem at hand. In doing a Bible study with Lutheran lay people on the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, I pointed out the inconsistency of the Lord stating in the beginning that I brought the Israelites out from the land of slavery in Egypt. And then in the 10th commandment, the Lord says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Exodus 20:17. I pointed out the inconsistency of saying that they were liberated from slavery, but now they could be rich slaveholders with houses, fields, animals, and slaves. In addition, the wife would be nothing but a piece of property like the house, ox, and field. When we got to the 5th commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall work and do all your work, but the 7th is a day to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. I pointed out again that the you addressed in these laws in Hebrew was a rich male who owned slaves and cattle. This is because the you in these laws is second masculine singular. These laws are only directed to men. So, and they are not addressed to women. When I asked, so who doesn't get a Sabbath? One of the men said, the wife. His wife claimed, Dr. Bailey, you're getting him in trouble. I responded, the text is getting him into trouble since he has realized that the laws are only addressed to upper class Israelite men who own property, cattle and slaves, and their wives in their society are seen as property first of their fathers and then of their husbands. Again, what I am doing is looking at how class and economics are carried out in the text, as well as the construction of gender. In essence, in my view, the text was written by humans who had particular ideas which grew out of their societies. I am also claiming that there are writers of books in the Bible who disagree with other writers. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says it's all right to eat meat sacrificed to idols. The writer of the Apocalypse says, God will get you if you eat meat sacrificed to idols. Paul writes the law kills, while the writer of the first gospel has Jesus say, I came not to abolish the law. In the creation story in Genesis 1, humans are created last. In the second creation story in Genesis 2, man was created first and the woman came after animals are created. I take from the fact that books which disagree with each other are in the collection called the Bible, suggest to us that we can be in community with people who look at things differently. In another instance, I was lecturing in the Bay Area when Proposition 8 related to same-gender marriage was being debated in California. I was invited to preach at a Black Baptist church in San Francisco that weekend. My sermon was on the claim placed in the mouth of Jesus in Matthew 25. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to eat. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we did all this? And he would say, inasmuch as you did it unto the least of these, you did it unto me. In my sermon, I relied on my education at the School of Social Service Administration at University of Chicago and expressed my distress that this passage only promotes social service and no social policy concerns. In essence, there was no concern on what social policies were enacted by the Romans, which created the situation in the colonies such that the people were deprived of food, clothing, and housing, and were in prison. I suggested that this passage tells churches to have clothing closets and food pantries and prison ministries where you go and sing hymns and bring toothbrushes. I then raised the issue of LGBT siblings of incarcerated individuals who are rearing their nieces and nephews while the parents of these children are in prison, because the passage only deals with the people in prison and not who in the family got the responsibility of rearing their children. I also raised the concern in this passage being wrapped around the me in the text and not the social situation. After church, one of the members came through the line and said, you were telling us to vote yes on Proposition 8, right? I responded, I would never tell people how to vote, but if that is your reading of the sermon, run with it. Sadly, another woman came through the line and said, I wish my lesbian daughter had been here to hear what you said. This is the first time I have ever heard from the pulpit that I should love my lesbian daughter. I wanted to scream, why the hell do you attend a church that teaches you to hate your child? Instead, I calmed myself down and suggested she discuss the sermon with her daughter, and she should make sure she tells her daughter she loves her. Let me again state that as a biblical scholar and the follower of the faith, I look at the text through the lens of what social political constructs are being sanctioned by the text. I also look at the interpreters of the text to see what are the social theories which are being supported or assumed to be positive or negative by the interpreters. Clearly, the notion the Bible as the Word of God is a construct to keep us from exploring these issues. I came to realize the radicality of my theological claim when I was confronted at another EATWAT meeting in the Philippines. One of the Latin American members yelled at me, we need la Biblia para la lucha. We need the Bible for the struggle. I responded, no, we need la lucha. If La Biblia helps, then fine. But if La Biblia doesn't help, we still engage the struggle. So when we approach the issues of vulnerability, we cannot rely on supremacist texts to give us guidance. As I have argued before, sexuality is often utilized in biblical narratives as a way of labeling the other, so that the oppression of the other is seen as acceptable. We see this in Abram and Sarai going to Egypt in Genesis 12, verses 10 to 20. He tells her that if the Egyptians think she is his wife, they will kill him. So she should tell them that she is his sister. When they get to Egypt, the Egyptians give him a large dowry for her, and she becomes Pharaoh's wife. So in essence, Abram pimps Sarai to save his life. On the academic sphere, many commentators refer to Leviticus 18, 1 to 5, that says, don't do like the Egyptians do, and then starts talking about incest laws, that's what is really happening here. But the anthropologists have shown us that the Egyptians did not practice that incest. As the Genesis story continues, the Lord zaps Pharaoh instead of Abram. Why did God not zap Abram for pimping his wife? Once Pharaoh figures out that she's his wife, he gives her back and he lets him keep all of the dowry. In fact, at a Black ministers conference held at Tuskegee, when Dr. Ed Wheeler was chaplain there, I utilized this passage as a model for biblical basis for community economic development. Pimp your wife, you'll get a lot of stuff, you'll get her back, and then you can go on with it. I still remember Dr. Charles Adams, who had been sitting on the stage during my presentation, taking copious notes, dropped his pen and looked at me like I was crazy. What most concerns me is how women have been trained to close their eyes when such horrors appear in the text and not express their own concerns, even if they see them. It's in the word, so it must be so. I am reminded of the op-ed I wrote, which was published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the day after President Obama evolved on the subject of same-gender marriage. My argument was that we have rejected the biblical understanding of heterosexual marriage. We don't allow polygamy. We don't allow levirate marriage, stoning for adultery. We don't require rape victims to marry their rapists. I was flying to DC that day and running late as usual, so I didn't get a chance to get a copy of the paper before I left. Those days I was traveling on Delta so much that I was almost always upgraded to first class. That day there was a noted Black TV commentator seated with his wife in 1A and 1B. I was in 2C. I shared with them the op-ed as I had it on my MacBook. He read it, passed it to his wife, then he returned the computer to me and said to me, Matthew 19. I said, you mean about marriage, one man, one wife? He responded, yes. I know that Jesus also is reported to have said if a man marries, divorces, and remarries, he'd be committing adultery. So are you prepared to stone your friends who have divorced and remarried? He turned away and never answered. At baggage claim, his wife said to me, Sodom and Gomorrah. I responded, you mean when Lot thinks his visitors are in danger by a gay mob and says, pull a train on my virgin daughters? Yup, she said. I responded, what has the church done to your spiritual understanding that you think offering one's daughters for gang rape is an acceptable fatherly response? How has the church taught you to deny your fears of the horrors of gang rape and think Lot's response is putting the safety of the visitors over the safety of his daughters is acceptable? I then told her I had an article on this passage of scripture and I'd email it to her husband. My email address and my phone number would be on the email and they could call me if they had questions. Once I got settled in the hotel and had a break at my meeting, I searched from his emailed the article and included my numbers at ITC and my cell number. Should either of them want to follow up, I can still report to you that over 10 years later, I have not received a call back nor an email in response to my article. Such a problem is not unique to the Hebrew Bible. One of the US Black scholars at EWA presented a paper at one of our meetings at a US university in which he argued against the ways 19th and 20th century European church missionaries negatively depicted African culture, especially drumming, and its religious significance. The scholar spoke to the negative impact of such anti-cultural statements of the missionaries. During the question and answer period, I asked him, what's the difference between what the missionaries did and what's in Ephesians 2, where it's written that you once were doing lascivious and sexual things until you met Jesus, and now you put away all your terrible things, your cultural things, and now you have life. An explicit example of this depreciation of indigenous religious cultural practices was brought home to me when I lived and taught in South Africa for 6 months. I was at the College of the Transfiguration in Grahamstown, South Africa. This is an Anglican college which Bishop Tutu had consolidated the Black, colored, and white theological colleges into one. I was invited by the rector, who had met me at a conference in Hawaii where I was presenting some of my ideological concerns. Living in Africa for an extended period of time was transformative in my own theological and emotional development. The first time I was put on to the preaching calendar at the college was for Transfiguration Sunday. And approaching the gospel text for that service, I saw Jesus getting prepared for the upcoming revolution. The cues were there as he used the Israelite prophetic view of fishing as a metaphor for the destruction of the oppressor, to tell the disciples we're going fishing, because everybody knows when you're going fishing, once you get them, you cut off the heads, scale them, fry them, and eat them. That doesn't sound like evangelism to me. So as he goes up to the mountain, he gets into dialogue with Moses and Elijah, both of whom confronted oppressors, Pharaoh and Ahab, in times of national oppression. I noted, however, since Moses and Elijah had run away from trouble sometimes, most probably Deborah and Esther were also there for this consultation to keep the brothers in line. It was just the misogyny of the writer who excluded these sisters who would keep the brothers on track. I pointed out that as the lifetime of Jesus, Moses, Deborah, Elijah, and Esther were dead. So Jesus was depicted as consulting the ancestors about his revolutionary tactics. This means that ancestral veneration was right there in the text. So why did we allow the missionaries to tell us that ancestral veneration wasn't Christian? While most of the students appreciated the sermon, most of the Zulus told me that I was wrong and the missionaries were correct. Ancestral veneration was pagan in their eyes. Again, we see that religious oppression can be so strong that the oppressed embrace and fight for it. On one hand, this could be an unwillingness to admit that we have been duped. On the other hand, one does not want to believe that we are following a religion that is based in our own people's hearts. It would also be that some have gravitated to this religion because it is seen as a European religion. In such instances, the sense of being relieved from vulnerability cannot be found in one's own indigenous religious constructs. What this suggests to me is that adhering to a religious formulation which challenges supremacist ideology runs contrary to why one seeks religious affiliation. This also suggests that many people are drawn to a religion as a way of avoiding the life struggles of freedom and responsibility. I have long come to understand Black religious formation as one of continued struggles against oppression. I have previously argued that the so-called Negro spirituals are coded double talk. For example, in the spiritual Go Down Moses, there are references to Moses being instructed to go tell, O Pharaoh, to let my people go. There are instructions to Moses to do this in Exodus 5:1, 7:16, 8:1, and 20, and 9:1. In all of these passages, the full instruction is to tell Pharaoh to let my people go so they could worship me. As we all know, that reason for emancipation is ignored in the spiritual. Our people just said, let my people go, period. They omitted the motive clause and just said, we getting out of here. We'll figure out what we do later. But God says we gotta go. In climbing Jacob's ladder, the biblical reference is to Jacob's dream in Genesis 28. In that passage, there are angels going up and down the ladder. In the spiritual, we are the soldiers of the cross. They said, we don't need any angels, we need soldiers. We're in a struggle. And they also understood in saying soldiers of the cross that this was an understanding that Jesus' struggle was political in nature. The genius of the spirituals is that the enslavers kept saying, isn't it nice that darkies are buying into the Bible, thereby missing the coded discourse. I have to admit that as I've dealt with this in Black churches, they seem to have missed the coded discourse also. And oh, Mary, oh, Martha, don't you weep, don't you moan? This is a reference to John 11. In this passage, Jesus was told Lazarus was sick. Jesus was traveling with his boys, and Jesus said, Lazarus won't die. In verse 4, but Lazarus dies. And when Jesus finally shows up, Mary gives him what for? Telling him that Lazarus wouldn't died if your butt had been here. And Jesus responds that he's the resurrection and the life. In the spiritual, Mary and Martha are seen to be like enslaved Africans in the US who were being raped and whipped, being killed, their children sold off to other plantations, never to have been seen again, and Jesus wasn't showing up. In the spiritual, Mary and Martha were like the children who were separated from their parents at the border, never to see them in over 3 years. And people keep saying, this doesn't happen in this country, it happened to us. It seems as though the devaluing of non-white lives and destroying family bonds has been practiced since 1619 on these shores. As Isabel Wilkerson has convincingly argued in her new book, Caste, The Origins of Discontents, this fundamental devaluing of lives in this country and the dehumanizing of people on a segmenting of a hierarchy of humanity based on a system of color has been a way of valuing and devaluing people. It has been and continues to be the horrors of this country. This is why Black men were infected with syphilis as an experiment, since in the eyes of the experimenters, we're not even human. So we can do whatever we want to Black men. As the spiritual says, Mary and Martha are told not to weep, not to moan, because Pharaoh's army got drowned. This is a reference to the drowning at the sea in Exodus 14. Now, the traditional Black religious interpretation of the spiritual is that the God of the resurrection is the God of the Exodus. I disagree with this interpretation for two reasons. First is the fact that the spiritual does not speak to Jesus in the resurrection. Instead, the spiritual replaces that claim with the claim that Pharaoh's army got drowned. By the same token, the spiritual does not reference the liberation of the Israelites from Egypt. Instead, it focuses on the destruction of the enslaver. And this way, the spiritual is riffing off the text and saying, Mary and Martha, forget that resurrection stuff. Start looking at the insurrections where the enslaved are being killed. It appears that the spiritual has a proactive way of addressing vulnerability and a faith that seeks faith through justice. More importantly to me, the spiritual addresses women, knowing that though undervalued by the society, they're the ones who will stand up and yell at Jesus when it comes too late. The spiritual warns us that we better hold up Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune, Shirley Chisholm, Angela Davis, Marion Wright Edelman, Fannie Lou Hamer, Amelia Boynton Robinson, Anita Hill, Stacey Abrams, Alicia Garza, and Patrice Cullors, and Kamala Harris. The genius of the spirituals was that it could speak to the initiated through double talk in ways that the struggle must continue. The genius of the spiritual was also that the enslavers could be duped into thinking the enslaved were buying into oppression, and escapist strands of the religious tradition, and not realize the insurrectionist nature of this form of religion. The sad thing, however, was that the spiritual writers forgot to tell their children who are going on, such that some, if not most of them, miss it also. As noted above, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem was kicking off of the revolution. The genealogy of Jesus in the first and third Gospels was that he was from the lineage of David. I always have a chuckle at these passages. There used to be a time when reporters from around the country and from as prestigious papers would call me at ITC and ask, is there any biblical basis that Jesus was Black? I knew they wanted me to go to Daniel 7:9 with the Ancient of Days, whose hair was like pure wool. But I would respond, just look at his genealogies in the first and third Gospels. They would respond, but they were Jews. Kind of, I gotcha. And I would respond, that's right, but not one of them listed there was a European. These people were indigenous to that part of the world in Northeast Africa. So that makes sense that Jesus was Black. Now, on the other hand, we get in Matthew 2, the story that Herod from the wise men decides that he's going to kill off the babies, and the angel goes and tells Jesus to go to Egypt. And Black folk have been saying, I've heard William Barber say, that since he was able to hide in Egypt, they must have been Black. But in that story, the angel only tells Joseph to get Jesus out of the way. What about the 300 other babies? Why didn't the Spirit tell their parents? I think that's a message that the writer of the gospel is trying to say. Don't worry about the boys in the hood, just worry about Jesus and just protect this notion of Jesus. And hopefully we cannot get duped by this. Scholars have shown that the Romans have used crucifixion as a public lynching of 3 types of people: traitors to the state, runaway slaves, and political revolutionaries. So if the Romans crucified Jesus, he had to have fit into one of these categories. Now, he couldn't have been a traitor to the state because he wasn't a Roman citizen. This means he was either a runaway slave or a political revolutionary. You choose. Clearly, his turning over the money changers table where the Roman taxes were collected suggests that he was a political revolutionary working up the people to rebel against Rome and the Herodians. This is why he was killed. In this way, we are given cues of traditional African religion that the resurrection narratives are again ancestral veneration, where Jesus comes back as one of the ancestors saying that he is still involved with us in the struggle. So he says, if you're following me, pick up your own damn cross. And the question comes, are we following the Jesus who was a revolutionary, or are we following the milquetoast one? This is why in his sermon, The Knock at Midnight, Dr. King, whose parsonage in Montgomery had been bombed, sat at the kitchen table with a pistol on the table. He had been stabbed in New York. He was threatened all over the country. But he said he knew what was happening, but he was going to continue the struggle. We see, however, how pop gospel music hasn't learned from the spirituals. In One Night with the King, there is no understanding of what Erica Dunbar has shown us, that this is a story in the book of Esther of the sexual trafficking of Asian and African virgins from all parts of the empire, from India to Ethiopia. After Vashti refuses to go parade herself before the king and she's banished, virgins are brought from all parts of the kingdom. They're given 6 months of cosmetic, 6 months of perfume training, and then each one by one, went to spend a night with the king. This is a screwing contest. And so Aretha Franklin and Juanita Bynum, when they sing One Night with the King, can change anything. They don't know that they're talking about sexual trafficking here. Why is it that we can look at this story and not see the horrors here? And why is it that pop gospel wants to go in another direction? By the same token, when we sing, I'm so glad he died, he didn't die, he was lynched. Why is it when they say that's love that he died? No, he was lynched. And the question comes, I keep asking the scholars who are doing scholarship on current day lynchings, what scripture references were used at the funerals? What sermons were preached in the eulogy? Were the caskets open other than Emmett Till? And they say, well, we aren't looking at any of that. So when we get to ethics and vulnerability, truth and faith, I hope I have shed some shade on the ways we can rethink the ways of approaching not only our faith traditions, but we can resonate with how this knowledge can lead one to bring into one's own traditions. Given what is happening in the country now, especially in the elections, we can reflect on really what's on our plate. I look forward to the response and dialogue. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sonia Sweat, and I will now present to you Dr. David Hodge. He is the Associate Director for Education and Associate Professor at the National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare at Tuskegee University, the Senior Associate Editor for the Journal of Healthcare, Science, and Humanities, and the Director of the Bioethics Honors Program. He has written 3 books: God of Our Silent Tears, Women of the Bible, Healing Women of Today, In the Midst of My Tears, The Bible Speaks to Abandonment, Betrayal, Rejection, and Loss, and God of Our Silent Tears, A 5-Week Journey. He has also published several peer-reviewed articles. Dr. Hodge is presently in the research and writing stage of 2 books, Pragmatic Bioethics and Intersectionality, Public Health Ethics, Bioethics, and Marginalization, Springs Press, and Jesus, Trust and Virtue Ethics, a philosophical theology of trustworthiness, Scholars Press. He came to Tuskegee University from a sister HBCU, Florida Memorial University, where he gave leadership to the Religion and Philosophy Department for almost 2 decades. In 2016, he moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where he served as part-time professor in philosophy at Georgia State University and as a guest lecturer in philosophy, theology, and ethics at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. From 2011 to 2016, he taught moral theory and bioethics at Nova Southeastern University, and he has taught logic, philosophy, ethics, and religion at St. Thomas University, Barry University, Miami-Dade College, and Broward College. In 2019, Dr. Hodge presented in bioethics, public health ethics, and neuroethics in Rome, Italy, Cape Town, South Africa, the Society for Neuroscience annual meeting in Chicago, Illinois, Case Western Reserve University, Emory University, and several other locations in the Caribbean and across the Commonwealth. His University of Miami PhD dissertation, Jesus, the Virtue Ethicist, a meta-ethical anticipation of moral sentimentalism, empathy, and care, has had a significant amount of readership worldwide. Dr. Hodge's work continues to intersect the role of virtue, empathy, and care in our existential concerns. Dr. Hodge.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sonia Sweat. She is, Ms. Sweat is one of our honor students at the National Center for Bioethics and Research at Healthcare Tuskegee at the Bioethics Honors Program. And so we are appreciative to have her, as I'm especially appreciative to have her present me in this conversation. She and I have had long conversations because she came and she only make A's. I don't understand people like that. That was not my experience. So she only make A's 4.0 across the board, and she is now in the master's in nursing program. after she left the business world. So that's the second career. I actually said, I don't know, with all those A's you make, why don't you just become a medical doctor? Well, she said, not yet. That's not what her calling is, which is very important to me because nurses is the buffer between the doctor and the patient. And therefore the nurse, whereas the doctors may be empathic, the nurses have to be empathic. They have to be caring, and she does engender that spirit. That's how she is. She's an adult, non-traditional learner, so that's how she is with our students. So thank you very much, Ms. Sweat, and continue the blessings upon you. Thank you, Dr. Randall Bailey, for that wonderful presentation. And now I'm going to do my best to give a little chit chat here, and not necessarily hit upon everything that you talked about. I may not hit on anything you talked about, but one principle you talked about is really important to me. And I see Dr. Riggins Earl has signed on. So it's good to see him. Gives me encouragement. Amen. If he smiles, that means I'm on the right track. If he doesn't smile, I'm in trouble. All right. So we ready to roll. Ladies and gentlemen, this moment in history is so important that I'm just going to take my time, and I'm going to stay within my time limit, but I'm not going to cover a whole lot of things. I'm just going to cover a couple salient points that Dr. Bailey actually hit upon, and that is the notion of something that Dr. Earl said when he lectured at Tuskegee in 2017, which was the year that Dr. Warren, although we've been working together, that's the year that he first heard me talk, and said afterwards, he said, Doc, we want you at Tuskegee. So that year, I lectured on ethics of ambiguity in response to Dr. Earl, who lectured on the ethics of reading. The ethics of reading. The question primarily being is who's reading the stuff. And one of the questions our new colleague at Tuskegee, Dr. Gwendolyn West, always asking is who's writing the stuff. And both of those questions are dialogical. They go hand in hand, the ones who's writing and the ones who are reading, because both of them carry the weight of the hermeneutical circle. That is the method of interpretation, how we're going to interpret that which was written, and how is the interpreter going to interpret that which he or she is reading. So those are extremely important parts of the conversation. And because other part of the question, in the kind of the hermeneutical triangle, is what goes into the kinds of stuff that goes into the reader, that creates the nuances that makes him or her respond in specific ways or particular ways that can be either helpful or harmful. So the ethics of reading is absolutely major to what Dr. Bailey was just trying to say. So let's do a little reading here. I'm going to do a shared screen. I'm going to do a little shared screen, and I want to read something to you. Richard Dawkins, who's the kind of foremost atheist in the country. He's a biology professor and scholar by training. He says this: the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Sounds like Donald Trump, and I'm not saying that facetiously. I'm just saying that that definition sounds a lot like how Donald Trump has been defined. I'm saying this for an important way. we would all agree that many people would say that Donald Trump is a lot like this, right? Jealous and proud of being of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. But notice, he got 70 million votes. Donald Trump got 70 million votes, and if any of these words are attached to him, then you must wonder how the heck did he get 70 million votes? At the same time, we must wonder, is any of these descriptives in any way plausible descriptives for how a person can see, would see, or interpret God? Jealous, is God jealous? Well, God says, I am a jealous God. God seems to be proud that God is jealous. Petty, God seems to get upset about some little things. Unjust, kill them all, kill the Amalekites, leave none standing alive. Unforgiving, control freak. You're going to kill everybody on the planet because of some, including the babies, including the monkeys and the sheep and the goat, and they have no moral compass. But God, you're going to kill the animals? Come on. Bloodthirsty, you're ethnic cleansing. You kill all the Asians and Africans, and only place people you kept were the folk on the boat. That's Noah, his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the wives who were unnamed because apparently they didn't have names. Women didn't have names in those days. They were just women, you see. Homophobic, man should not lay with another man as he would lay with a woman. That's an abomination. Misogynistic, the way, like I just said, the women weren't named. God seemed like God doesn't like women. That's interesting. Racist, kill this people, kill that people, kill the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amalekites, kill them all. Infanticidal, kill the babies. Noah's flood. Genocidal, kill the race. So it goes on and on and on. And we must wonder, does the atheist have a point? Does the atheist have a point? Because that description that Richard Dawkins give about God, I just gave you some examples where he's totally justified in the description he gives. Totally justified. And so how do we reconcile? Because my conversation today is about faith and truth. How do you reconcile? How to reconcile our beliefs in that particular God who is extremely the kind of person that I want to introduce to my mama. And I love my mama. I love me some mama. But I don't want my mama associated with that God. And I take it a step further. I don't even think Jesus want to be associated with that God. The Jesus in the New Testament will have nothing to do with that God of the Hebrew Bible. Dr. Earl and I have been having this conversation, and he said to me, he said, you know, there's a major difference between the God of Moses and the God of Jesus. There's a major difference. The God of Moses, look at how he is described with justification. The God of Jesus, look at how we describe him. He's a bright in the morning star, the lily of the valley. He's the captain of my soul. Look how sweet. He walks on water. He's full of compassion and love. And the word that we give to him is theos, as opposed to the word that we give, the Hebrew words of Adonai, Elohim, and Yahweh. So it seems to be a different God. Is it a different God? I don't think it's a different God, but I think it's a different interpretation of God. And I think that lends itself to what Dr. Bailey was just putting out. Well, if it is in fact a different interpretation of God, then a whole concept for what is faith and what is truth, particularly in the illustration that Dr. Bailey gave in terms of the young man who came to his house with whom he was going to cut the man's hands off, or cut the man's feet off, or cut the man's penis off, and go to prison. With that whole illustration, that young man came with his own interpretation of God. Our minds are blown. We just can't figure out how can the evangelicals and how can we serve the same God? That is a perennial question, because we wonder how could Martin and John F. Kennedy serve the same God? How could the slave, Kelly Brown Douglas in a wonderful book, The Black Price, raised the question between the slave God and the slaveholder's God? Different gods or different conceptualizations of God. And so the question then is that we have to push is on the ethics of reading, as Dr. Earl pushed, the ethics of reading, and again, the ethics of writing, because they're dialogical. So let me do a little reading here. And forgive me if I'm not reading clear. My eyes are giving me a little bit of trouble. But Renita Weems in Stony the Road We Trod, in an article, the section called African American Women in the Bible, she writes, the experience of oppression has forced the marginalized reader to retain the right as much as possible to resist those things within the culture and the Bible that one finds obnoxious or antagonistic to one's innate sense of identity and one's basic instincts for survival. The latter, she says, has not always been easy. To resist to resist the things in the Bible that are not the Word of God. Let me say it again. To resist the things in the Bible that are not the Word of God. There are things in the Bible that are not the Word of God. Dr. Bailey pointed out several of them. But if I was to buy into Paul's language of slave obey your masters, you know where I would be right now? I would still be in Georgia, but picking cotton. If I bought into Paul's language about women, wives being submissive, and not the whole scope of the text, if I was to buy into that language, you know where I'd be right now? Well, I'd still be here, but my wife will be massaging my feet, being submissive. The language of the Bible, if it's not correctly interpreted, is going to lend itself to several different interpretations. So the language of faith would allow for, because of interpretation, for the evangelicals to do, as Dr. Earl mentioned yesterday, to pray one prayer for President Obama and a different prayer for President Trump. I like what Dr. Warren just put there. There's one God, but many interpretations. That's correct. I'm fond of saying, I have nothing against my Muslim brothers. I have nothing against my Buddhist brothers. I have nothing against brothers and sisters. I have nothing against, because you can't fit God in the box. Say this is God. God operates only in what is in this book. There's just too much going on there. So part of what we do, now let's get to the truth part. Part of what is going on in trying to understand the text is really trying to get to some knowledge of the text is actually saying. This means that we have to have what's called in philosophy, we have to have a kind of epistemology of the text. That is, we have to have some kind of knowledge of the text, of what's going on in the text. So in epistemology, you cannot have any kind of knowledge, you cannot claim to have knowledge until you fulfill certain conditions. Three of them, and even after you fulfill those conditions, you still have a problem, but just to give you them quickly is number one, whatever you say you know, you must be justified in saying that you know it. whatever you say you know, you must be justified in saying that you know it. And justification is intimately connected to evidence. That means you cannot say that you know anything unless you have evidence to back up what you say you know. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you so say that you know that there was a flood that covered the entire world and all the people got killed in the world, including the fish drowned. The fish drowned in the water. One fella, I heard Dr. Bailey, one fella, I was giving Bible study one morning. This is why I can't listen to TV preachers and radio preachers anymore. They just get on my nerve. One fella said on the ark, there were space to have the Brontosaurus 2x2. The Tyrannosaurus 2x2, the Pterodactyls 2x2, the Stegosaurus 2x2. He said the dinosaurs were on the ark. The dinosaurs were 7 million years before there was an ark. And the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible is not the only place that talks about an ark. The Gilgamesh epic talks about an ark. The Sumerians, they talk, not an ark, but a similar story. They had so many of those stories. And then we come with who came off the ark? We had Noah came off the ark, Shem, Ham, Japheth came off the ark. They said that Japheth became the Europeans, Shem became the Jews, and Ham became the Africans. Oh, sweet Jesus. And the children of Ham is Canaan, and therefore that's why the Canaanites, who are the Africans, will serve their brothers. But the problem
was he sweet?
Huh?
Was he sweet?
Who?
Jesus. You said sweet Jesus. I was wondering, was he sweet?
leave it alone. Let me do my talk now. I'm trying to talk.
Don't understand that.
Dr. Warren, would you please talk to this man? All right. So I was saying, sweet Jesus. I was saying that man, it's your fault.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off. I'll mute.
I don't know what in the world I was talking about. Okay, so you got these dinosaurs on the ark, the man. Okay, so you got Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, but the way the text is told, in their world, it wasn't. This was prior to the Copernicus revolution. It was prior to the Kepler revolution. It was prior to Newton. It was because if it was prior to all of this, they thought it was before 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. They thought the Earth was flat. So their understanding of the Earth was one that was four-dimensional. And if you go too far to the right or the left, you're going to fall off. So Jesus said, do not put new wine into old wineskin or the bag will burst. We keep putting new minds and new ideas into old wineskins and they keep bursting because they can't handle it. It continues to blow my mind that that in every areas of our lives, when I have a pain in my tooth, I want the best doctor, the best dentist. When I have a pain in my eye, I want the best ophthalmologist. When I have a legal problem, I want attorney Monica Beamer and now Charlene Bryan. I want the best attorney, Dr. McCrary. I want the best attorney. When my car breaks down, I want the best mechanic. But when I go to church, I want the dumbest pastor. I must check. I want to be smarter than my pastor. I need to check my knowledge at the door. So all kind of common sense stuff that should be absolutely clear, that will define our faith and give us the energy and the fortitude to push against oppression, we shut it down. The fellow asked Jesus, should I get a sword? Jesus said, no, sell your coat and get 2 swords. Sometimes we need to be prepared for armed rebellion. Jesus was both Martin and Malcolm. We love the Jesus of that is metaphorically, I have a dream, but we don't like the Jesus that is metaphorically Malcolm, which is by any means necessary. So the evangelicals push the I have a dream, but they have nothing to say about by any means necessary. They don't like the Malcolm side of us. What it means to have faith and truth is to, number one, understand that if we are going to be a people of faith, we must first of all be justified in the interpretation of the text that we have. We must have justification. Justification is intimately connected to evidence. And number two, whatever it is that we're justified in believing, we must believe it. I love how Attorney Monica Beamer, how Attorney Bryant, how Attorney McCrary, so one day Mr. Keene, what they were arguing, these wonderful scholarly women were arguing today was that we should be advocates for what we believe. Why? Because our belief is based upon our justification. And our justification, what did I say, is intimately connected to evidence. So justification doesn't just hang in the air. The justification has evidence attached to it. So our justification connected to evidence gives us the strength to have a belief, and whatever that belief is should create advocacy for the least, the lost, and the left out. We are wasting our time shooting rubber bands at the stars if we are not willing to go after the least, the lost, and the left out. Those women just gave us a charge. Now, the third part of it is not only do we believe, but we must also, whatever we justified in believing, whatever we believe, is that's good, but it must also be true. The truth condition for knowledge is very, very difficult to both articulate and to embrace, because people like to say stuff like, this is my truth, so making truth subjective. When that is done, when truth is subjective, it literally gives permission to incarcerate someone who doesn't look like me. When truth is subjective, it gives permission for me to alienate anyone who doesn't look like me. When my truth is subjective, my truth says that a person who is gay and lesbian is of a different humanity than I am. When truth is subjective, it says that a person who is of a different class has more value than I do. When truth is subjective. So therefore, we must resist the temptation to embrace any kind of theory that magnifies a subjective truth. There should be, truth must be objective. That is, truth must be such a thing that a belief that I have corresponds to a fact about the world. Now, we see right now in the electoral process, some of us have a truth about, say, who won the presidency, and it correlates with the facts about the world. But then there are a whole host of people led by Mitch McConnell and his buddy Donald Trump who are trying to tell us that that fact about the world that we see with our own eyes is not a fact. So now they're saying, Georgia, we're going to recount the votes. I said, yes, recount the votes. Go ahead, one at a time. 1, 2, 3, recount the votes, because all that is going to do is fact, and it's going to still remain a fact even after you recount the vote. So what happens is we now have objective validation, even more objective validation of the facts that are in play, to say to Mr. Trump, look, once again, you lost. So now you lost twice. You lost 3 times. You lost in election day, you lost when the absentee votes came in, and now you lost with the recount. And by the way, Mr. Trump, let's go ahead and count one more time. This time, but you need to pay for that, just like you had, Mexico to pay for the wall. The point is that if truth is a kind of thing that is subjective, that is independently valuable to me and not to somebody else, it creates a system of hierarchy in individuals where one is prioritized against the other. So the topic of ethics and vulnerability, truth and faith, I will end with this little piece of our statement, and that is that the boys Du Bois, we got to talk about Du Bois when we have these conversations. One of the most quoted of Du Bois' statement is the whole notion of the double consciousness, the whole notion of the two-mindedness. What does it mean for a Black person to be in America? As a matter of fact, he begins, what does it mean to be a problem? One of the things that this whole election process was about that question. What does it mean to be a problem? And you know what we discovered? It means that when you are a problem, and you are a problem in solidarity with community, then you create enough noise to motivate Representative Congressman Clyburn to raise the voice and the appreciation of Vice President Biden, and such that his state would push Biden over and become the person to whom we can have in the run for the presidency. When we have, ladies and gentlemen, this double consciousness, when we understand that we have this two-ness, that once we put it in solidarity and do not reject the part of our two-ness that includes voting, then what happens is, and Dr. Warren and I, we were up all through the night laughing that the votes that would push Joe Biden over came from Fulton County, where Dr. Earl lives, and DeKalb County, where Dr. Warren is, and where Dr. Bailey's over there. He's over there with that county, and I'm down here by Clayton County. And you know who live in Clayton County? The real brothers and sisters. So when we saw what votes were out, it's a wrap. We now know because Joe Biden made it clear, Vice President Biden made it clear, President-elect Biden made it clear that I could not have gotten here without Black people. That's what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you take your faith and you attach it to truth. That is, as Sawandi Masakim called, tangibility to facts, and you put them together. This is what you get. You get power. Now, Jesse Jackson said many years ago, he said, listen carefully, my religion makes me political. My politics doesn't make me religious. Because of my Jesus, my sweet Jesus, oh, Lashandabo, because of my sweet Jesus, Jesus makes me political. Jesus makes me get involved. Why? Because I'm concerned about the least, the lost of the left. I'm concerned about loving my neighbor as myself. Therefore, Jesus makes me political. Jesus is why I'm so passionate. Jesus is why I can't stop being who I am as David Hodge, you see. But I'm also a Democrat. My stance as a Democrat doesn't make me go to church. Just doesn't make me worship. You see, so my politics doesn't make me religious, but my religion, my belief in God is what drives me forward. When I'm driving to Tuskegee in the morning, I'm singing, "Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus." When things are tough sometimes, because we have the wind in our face often, when things get tough, I got to come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses. And the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me it's going to be all right. All right. That's my response to Dr. Bailey. Dr. Bailey, I hope I did some justice to what you were saying in terms of the hermeneutics, that is the interpretation, and that you have God up here, you have theology down here, and in between is interpretation. That's called hermeneutics. That's how we figure out the difference between the two. All right, so questions. I put the questions to you, Ms. Sonia Sweat. If there are any questions in the thing you could ask, or if anybody out there have any questions, we are willing to entertain those questions now.
Okay. There aren't any questions as of right now.
Okay. Do you have any? Anyone on this on the have any questions? Actually, where's Ashanti? He also have a question.
I'm right here, Dr. Hodge.
Here it is. Go ahead.
I'm still in the process of formulating questions. If you can give me a little bit, I will have a good question for you.
Okay. All right. All right. Does anyone else have a question for us?
I would just say, I would give a caution to the writings of the first generation of womanists, because when it gets to the issue of God, they give God a pass. And I understand it theologically, why they do that. Sociologically, they know there's a problem, but they always give God and Jesus a pass when they act misogynistically in the text. I would also say that Kelly's argument in the Black Christ acts like she doesn't see that there is a scriptural basis for what right-wing evangelicals say about Jesus. That there are some of the Pauline texts and the Deutero-Pauline texts would support them. So that the problem is we have a disjuncture in the text, and that there are multiple voices. And we have a chance, I would say, with the text to choose which voices and to say which voices we find as problematic, and stand on our faith that those texts. It always intrigues me, and Renita in her article in the Story on the Road talks about Thurman's grandmother, who she wouldn't let him read from any of the Pauline or the Deutero-Pauline writings because of the slaves being obedient to your master, how that was used on the plantation. And a lot of Black folk cite that story, but I don't know any that have thrown Paul out of the Bible. So I keep wondering why they keep going to that story. I mean, what's the importance of that story if they're not going to follow Thurman's grandmother on that? Why bring that story up? And I've never, been clear, but I do understand that there are problems with. Renita always says she holds on to the text with a guilty hand, and I think what I'm proposing is an option of saying, oh, hell no to some of these texts. Now, and I also think that what I see in the spirituals is another mode of interpreting the stories and saying, we'll take part of this and take part of that, and we're going to use it in a way that's going to trick folk. And trickstering is, Anansi is there, that African trickster deity stuff was very comfortable for our people in enslavement. And I'm not sure why we aren't comfortable with it ourselves.
Do you think
Monica.
Do you think that it could be because we have so long relied on an abject, basic understanding of faith in how we choose to read the Bible, and we don't look any deeper. We go on blind faith as the substance of things hoped for, of things not seen, what we don't know, what we haven't seen, we don't question. And those things that we see that bring fear to us, we just kind of shut down and don't engage in any kind of in-depth or intellectual conversation about it.
I think what happens is that we are convinced that it's never going to be okay for us. And so we buy into this notion that if we go along and hold on to the faith, when we die, God is going to make it better for us.
Right.
And I don't know why we're trusting that that's what's going to happen then. Why is it? I think the Jesus model is one of fight for it to change here, realizing that you might lose, you might be done in, but our fear is that it's never going to be good. Therefore, we'll buy into this notion that on the other side, every day is going to be Sunday and howdy. And what happens when we get there, we find out that that ain't the case. Whose butt we going to kick then? And I think if we could help our people believe that we ought to have justice, we ought to have full resources and full access to resources, and we ought to have full opportunities in education. And if it means we have to fight for it, we fight for it. But we don't just pray that on the other side we'll get it. But then again, is my resolution for it.
You know, I want to respond to the piece that about God, Dr. Bailey. First of all, I think where the woman is, or perhaps justified, is in this way. The only way that the physical could talk about the metaphysical is through metaphor. Metaphor is the only access we have to talk about God. And when you have the Bible that is filled with metaphor about God, then the justification says that if I do not illuminate at least some metaphorical reference for God, I'm lack without something substantive. Remember in the color purple, where they define God as the white man at the back with a beard, and even though they did not want to embrace that metaphor for God, that they still live with it because that's all they had. So what do you say then to the fact that metaphor is part of the subjective, and therefore it works for the person who needed to work for them?
Well, what I'm saying is that in dealing with Hagar, Renita's says, the angel said, where you coming from, where you going? And she said, I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai. But she didn't answer the second question, so the Lord had no option but to send her back.
Right.
Yeah, the Lord could have said, baby, I asked you 2 questions.
Right.
Yeah, okay. You know, so I'm saying they give God a
pass.
A pass when the question could be, no, wait a minute. Kelly does not see Masawa has convincingly, I think, argued that the virgin birth story is Me Too. That's a Me Too story. Why is it? Well, I mean, when are we gonna look at the sexual abuse of teenagers that's sanctioned in the text, even by God? And so when I think the third generation of womanists are beginning to deal with those types of questions and struggle in those ways. But I think early in the process, the womanists felt they couldn't really hit the patriarchy problem because they were afraid Black men would get upset. And they wanted to stay in the Christian camp, so they had to give God a pass. And I think the spirituals give us options on how to play with that. But we don't, I understand it's very frightening to go down. It can be seen as very frightening to go down the path that I'm presenting. The only thing I'm trying to say is that's what going down that path is what kept me in the camp, because I can struggle there.
Well, you know, Blumenthal wrote a book called Facing the Abusing God, and you actually pointed out that what kind of a God, here you have God gave Joseph some secret information to get your child out of town, and all these other children were there, and God didn't think it important to, Joseph could have just as easily yelled to everybody else, hey, listen, get your children out of the camp, so they're coming to kill the babies. So you would think that that level of empathy or compassion would have arisen in Joseph to do so, but he failed to do so. So the only one that was excluded from what could have been, what seemingly was a catastrophe, was the child that became the child of Jesus. Now, the point of the pedophilia that you're raising, and that's a very tough one to talk about, because it, especially in our present climate, is a very tough one to talk about. But doesn't their culture, that this is how they lived, and their culture justify that pattern of behavior, and that they were wait, the fact that they were blaming on God is inconsequential to God.
The assumption that everybody in the culture went along with that, you know, with the parable of the 3 slaves and then the bridesmaids, Masala says, one of them says, here's your talent. You only gave me one. I was afraid I gave it back to you because I knew you were a harsh taskmaster. And the slave master says, okay, get out of here, because I can't trust you. And Masala says that's the only slave that's free. But we keep acting like he should have acted in a different way. But then with the 10 bridesmaids, when you have the 5 had oil, 5 didn't. The ones that didn't have oil went and got some. And when they came back, it was told it's too late. The door was closed. And one young woman who had taken 3 courses with me, had never said anything, was very quiet, said, that's when you take that oil, pour it down at the door and light a match. I said, excuse me? What? She said, yeah, that system is so corrupt. No, you gotta stop. And part of what I'm saying is that there are within our strands movements that have said, we can bend this into different ways. And in the bending, we can say that we're bending because of the problems. But to not admit the problems are there seem to be, for me, intellectually and emotionally dishonest.
All right. Well, our time, we have come to the end, and Miss Sweat, can you read the last part, the last point and question? And Dr. Bailey, the one person put a question in there, so Ms. Sweat is going to read it. But Dr. Bailey, after,
Lloyd.
Yes, and Dr. Bailey, after you will have the last. You can give your cleanup comments. We have about a minute. We're out of time right now, but we'll take 2 minutes.
I'll talk quickly.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bailey and Dr. Hodge, for this enlightening and thought-provoking discussion. I have just a comment. I am a proud Christian, but I also am very conscious myself. So like the word double consciousness, I've always believed that God is a loving God, and that is that. But white people have turned Christianity to make it fit their twisted ideologies. And we have to know that. Dr. Bailey, do you believe this or no?
I think that we have also strands of Black Christianity which buy into the same view that white Christians have. And I think we also have strands of Black Christianity which resist it. But we can't look at pop gospel today and not see how Black folk have abandoned our tradition of problematizing the faith. And when we look at even the tradition, some of the sermons that were preached by black preachers were ones to essentially keep us from fighting. So, we've had pluses and minuses all along the way.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bailey, for a very thought-provoking conversation. And we're out of time. And so
Thank
I want
you for inviting me.
We appreciate you coming and accepting. You're always open to that invitation. We so thank you. Thank you, Attorney Monica Beamer. She stuck around till the end to hear us get chatted. She's a PK. She's a preacher's kid, so she she had to stick around. Thank you, Dr. Earl, and for being here with us, and thank you, Sonia Sweat, for being such a wonderful host for us. And again, we thank all of the persons who work behind the scenes, Mr. Davis, Ms. Katina Griffin, to make sure that we are up and running and having this conversation.